Maranatha, the Lord comes.
Praise the Lord, you're welcome back. We've been studying in the last few teachings about the rise of the prophets, and we are at the situation where we looked at the ministry of Samuel and the rise of the prophets. And what we saw is that from the point that the children of Israel asked for a king, what then happened is that there was a rapid deterioration in the moral fabric, religious fabric of the nation, obviously, which led ultimately to the division of the nation into two, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And this deterioration in the religious and moral fabric of the nation actually led to the emergence of the prophetic coming into the force. So this was how we began to see the prophetic in the history of the children of Israel. So what I want to do today is to look at the factors which I've outlined here and there, but bring them together. Look at the factors that contributed to the rise of the prophets. The first one is the threat to the worship of God, of Yahweh, especially the emphasis on the worship of Baal under this various king. So God has warned them that they should not serve the gods of the nation around them. They should not marry their daughters, because once they start intermarrying with the daughters of the nation around them, oftentimes that was how they are drawn into idol and Baal worshipping. And this was the major factors that actually gave rise to the emergence of the prophet. And if we go back, even before the nation was divided, if we go back to Solomon, you remember the many wives of Solomon and concubine, and the Bible says that they drew his heart away from Jehovah, from Yahweh, and the nation began to deteriorate in their fabric. And this was the major factors that contributed to the emergence of the prophet. So the prophet started being the voice of the Lord, speaking unto the kings and speaking unto the nation, warning them, showing them, number one, that they are moving away from the religion and the God of their father, warning them of the repercussion of what will happen, because what is happening here is that they are breaking the covenant that they have with God, the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are breaking the covenant, and God has warned them. We've read this, and we're not going to go back into it. In Deuteronomy, God warned them that these curses will come upon them and overtake them when they break the covenant. They've forgotten the word of the Lord. They've forgotten the prophecy, the word of the Lord that God has given them through Moses, through Joshua, the warnings that has gone ahead of them. They've forgotten everything, and it is the prophet that bringing it back to their remembrance. This is the word, thus saith the Lord. This is the law. This is the covenant that you have with God. This is what is going to happen to you by, breaking the covenant and moving away from your God, but they will not listen. So this was the first factor that contributed to the emergence of the prophet. People moving away from the worship of God. They begin to mix the worship of God with the worship of Baal. There was a dilution, and this was what brought the prophetic to the fore. They were warning the people against the dilution, against the turning away from the pure worship of Jehovah. And obviously we can see example of that. King Ahab, Jezebel, and we can read that, their clash with Elijah. That is a classic example. And Elijah said, if God is God, let's worship him. And that gives us a very case study as to the clash between the king or the executive arm, if you may, of the government, and the if we can call the prophet the judicial arm of the government, if we can call it that way, really. So this was one of the factors that contributed to the rise of the prophets. Now, hand in hand with this deterioration, or this moving away from the true worship of Messiah, obviously, is the economic and social development in the kingdom of Israel and Judah. When people don't obey God, when we have leaders that don't fear God, when we have leaders that don't walk in righteousness, what ultimately happens is that the people suffer. So what we then have is also a deterioration in the economic and social development of the land of Israel. And this produces oppression of the lower classes. So there was such a disparity. We have classes where people are so rich and they are oppressing the poor. So the prophet came again as a voice of God, insisting that all the people are equal before God, and speaking out against oppression of the poor, the motherless, the fatherless. And this was one of the messages of the prophet. Also, they spoke, one of the things that then happened that I should have spoken about actually is people started moving away from the prescribed worship, in the sense of keeping the feast, keeping the Sabbath, all the things that God has told them. And these are some of the things that will have helped the poor also. Okay, the keeping the Sabbath, the Bible, we talk about they are the Sabbath of weeks, they are the Sabbath of years, and they were not keeping any one of these things. They were not keeping the feast, they were not keeping the Torah, and this was one of the reasons why the prophet started talking and trying to return them back to the true worship of Yahweh, but they will not have any of it. Now, another reason that contributed to the rise of the prophet also, which again goes hand in hand with the first two reasons we've mentioned about, is what is happening around Israel, what is happening in the world history around them. So the politics of the surrounding nation, like the Assyrians, the Babylonians, okay? So the politics, the political instability caused by the Assyrians, caused by the Babylonians, and the fact that God was going to use them to be an instrument of judgment against the nation, also was one of the contributing factors to the rise of the prophet. And one of the things you will say is that the prophet didn't only, and we're going to talk about that in a bit, the prophet didn't only talk about Israel, they also prophesy into what is going on internationally. So there are prophets concerning, for example, we'll talk about Jonah, Nineveh. Do you realize that Nineveh was the headquarters of the Assyrian? Right? So the things that were also happening on the international scene around the history of Israel also was one of the contributing factors that gave rise to the emergence of the prophet around this time. So, if we want to study the prophetic, or if you want to study the prophetic books, it is important for you and I to go back first to the historical book. Go back to the first, second book of Samuel, the first, second book of Kings, the first, second book of Chronicles. The first thing you need to ask yourself is that, when did this prophet prophesy? So this prophetic book that I want to study, during which period in the history of the children of Israel did this prophet stand in the office of a prophet? And that is very, very important. Who was the king during the time of Isaiah? Who was the king during the time of Jeremiah? It's very important because sometimes we read some of these prophetic books. If you don't understand the environment, the history, okay, that during which the prophet actually prophesied, it will be difficult for you to understand and to be able to put into context their prophecy. So if you want to study a prophet or a prophetic book of a prophetic message, ask yourself, at what point in time in the history of Israel did prophet live and prophesy? Okay. Now, also in addition to that, because this is very important, so you go back to this historical book, like I said, 1st, 2nd book of Samuel, 1st, 2nd book of Kings, 1st, 2nd book of Chronicle. Ask yourself, who was the king who was reigning and ruling during the time of this prophet? Number one. Number two, also ask yourself, because remember that at a point, just like we said, the nation was divided into two. So the second question you want to ask yourself is that, to which one of this kingdom was the prophet sent? Okay, so you need to understand, is it the northern kingdom or is it the southern kingdom? Because that is very important. Okay, so is it before they were divided, or is it when they were divided? And if it is after they have divided, was this prophet prophesying to the northern kingdom, or was this prophet prophesying to the southern kingdom? That is very important. So number one, you want to know who was the king. Number two, you want to know, is the prophet prophesying to the southern or to the northern kingdom? Also, there were one or two prophets that actually did not prophesy to Israel, that prophesied to other nations. Remember what we said a few minutes ago, that one of the reasons why the prophet also came into limelight is that some of them actually prophesied to Assyrians, for example. And you need to ask yourself, is this prophecy prophesying to other nations rather than to the Israelites? Okay, and this is very important. And also to help us understand this prophecy, it's also good for you to know who was the world power. Obviously, having answered the first and second question, that will give you an idea who was the world power when the prophet prophesied. Was it during the time of the Assyrians? Was it during the time of the Babylonians? Or was it during the time of the Medo-Persian? And that will help us to be able to interpret that prophecy, and also to be able to know how that applies to us, unto whom the end of time has come. There is another factor that is very important, which is related to what we have said. So when you want to look at the prophecy of the prophet, there's one thing you also ask yourself, because this put the prophecy and the ministry of the prophet in context. You have to ask yourself, was this prophecy before, during, or after exile? I mean, obviously, if the prophet prophesied to the northern kingdom, you know that there was nothing about during or after. Okay, so all the prophecy to the northern kingdom is before they were dispersed into exile, and that is it. But if you read the prophecy or the ministry of a prophet to the southern kingdom, you need to ask yourself, this prophecy, was it before they went into exile? Was it during the time that they were in exile? Or was it after they came back from exile? Because that will help you to put that prophecy in context. I'm going to stop here today. When I come back tomorrow, by the grace of God, I'm going to run through some of the prophets and give us when they prophesy, during which time they prophesy, and then move on from there. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you'll be able to join me tomorrow. God bless you. Bye.